The funeral home smelled like lilies and broken promises. I stood in the corner of the reception room, watching my family divide up my father's life like vultures picking at roadkill. Dad had been in the ground for exactly 3 hours, and they were already discussing who would get what. The house should go to Michael, Mom announced loud enough for everyone to hear. She was holding court near the guest book, surrounded by aunts and uncles who nodded along with whatever she said. He's got the family to think about and the mortgage payments won't be easy. Michael, my 32-year-old brother, stood next to his wife Sarah with their 2 kids tugging at his black suit. He looked appropriately somber, but I caught the satisfied gleam in his eyes when Mom mentioned the house. The family house. The Victorian 3-story that Dad had restored room by room over 20 years. The house that was supposed to be mine according to the will Dad had shown me just 6 months ago. Anna's doing well for herself, Mom continued, glancing in my direction. She's got her career, she's independent. She doesn't need the burden of a big old house. The burden. That's what she called the 3-bedroom home in the historic district that was currently worth $450,000. My Aunt Patricia nodded sympathetically. Michael does have those children to think about. It makes sense for the house to stay in the family with the grandkids. As if I wasn't family. As if Dad hadn't specifically told me the house would be mine because Anna's the one who'll take care of it properly. Besides, Mom added, her voice taking on that martyr tone she used when she wanted to sound noble, Anna's always been the strong one. She doesn't need the same kind of help Michael does. The strong one. Translation. The one we expect to sacrifice for everyone else without complaint. I watched Michael accepting condolences and subtle congratulations on his inheritance windfall. His wife Sarah was already talking to my cousin about redecorating ideas and whether they'd need to update the electrical system. They were planning their future in my house. Anna, honey, Mom called out, waving me over. Come here for a minute. I walked across the room, my heels clicking on the funeral home's polished floor. The family circle opened to include me, faces turned toward me with expressions that ranged from sympathetic to expectant. I know this is hard, Mom said, her voice gentle but firm. But we need to make some practical decisions about your father's things. She pulled a set of keys from her purse, the spare set Dad had given her years ago. The brass house key, the deadbolt key, the garage key, all hanging from a keychain with a photo of Michael's kids. These belong to Michael now, she said, pressing the keys into his palm. He's going to need time to get settled, figure out the mortgage situation, all of that. What about Dad's will? I asked quietly. Mom's expression tightened slightly. Your father wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. All that medication, the stress of being sick. We can't make major life decisions based on things he said when he wasn't well. He seemed pretty clear when I talked to him 3 weeks ago. Anna, Uncle Robert interjected, your mother's been taking care of the estate planning. She knows what's best for everyone. Michael has a family, Aunt Patricia added. You're young, you're successful, you have options he doesn't have. I looked around the circle of faces, all of them convinced they were being reasonable. All of them convinced that giving away my inheritance was somehow in my best interest. You understand, don't you? Mom asked, her tone suggesting that any other response would be selfish and inappropriate at my father's funeral. I could have argued. I could have mentioned the conversation I'd had with Dad just a month before he died, when he'd specifically told me the house was mine because I was the only one who truly appreciated what he'd built there. I could have brought up the updated will I'd watched him sign. Instead, I smiled and reached into my purse. Actually, Mom, I think there might be some confusion about the house. I pulled out a manila envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a deed transfer document, officially notarized and filed with the county recorder's office. I had a long talk with Dad 2 days before he died, I said, unfolding the papers. He was very clear about what he wanted. The conversation had happened on Tuesday morning. I'd gone to see Dad in the hospital, expecting to find him weak and medicated. Instead, he'd been sitting up in bed, alert and determined. Anna, I need you to do something for me, he'd said without preamble. I need you to take ownership of the house right now while I can still sign the papers. Dad, you don't need to worry about that now. Yes, I do. His voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. Your mother's been talking about Michael needing the house, about how you don't need the help. She's going to try to override the will. I'd stared at him. Can she do that? If she contests it, if she gets Michael and everyone else on her side, It could tie things up in probate for years. And you know how these family fights go. You'd spend more on lawyers than the house is worth. Dad had already arranged everything. His lawyer was waiting in the hospital lobby with the deed transfer papers. All we needed to do was sign them and have them notarized by the hospital's notary public. This way the house is legally yours before I die, Dad explained. No will to contest, no probate to manipulate. It's just a simple property transfer between a father and daughter. What about Michael? What about Mom? Dad's expression hardened. Michael's 32 years old with a good job and a working wife. If he can't figure out his housing situation without taking yours, that's his problem. But Mom will be furious. Your mother's been managing this family's money and property for 40 years. She's forgotten that some things aren't hers to manage. We'd signed the papers that afternoon. Dad had insisted on paying the transfer fees and recording costs himself, writing a check from his personal account that couldn't be disputed or reversed. I'm tired of watching you get pushed around by people who think your success means you don't deserve help, he'd said. This house is yours. Take care of it. Now, standing in the funeral home, I watched my family's faces change as they realized what the papers in my hands meant. This is a deed transfer, I said calmly. Dad signed the house over to me on Tuesday. It's already been filed with the county. Mom snatched the papers from my hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. This can't be legal, she said. He was medicated, he wasn't thinking clearly. He was completely lucid, I said. The hospital notary can verify that. So can his lawyer who prepared the documents. Michael finally found his voice. You can't just take the house. We already made plans. You made plans for my house without asking me. It's the family house, Sarah said, her voice rising. It should stay with the family. I am family. You know what I mean, she snapped. With the children. With the people who need it. I looked at Sarah, 29 years old, employed full-time as a dental hygienist, married to a man with a steady income in construction management. They lived in a perfectly nice 3-bedroom ranch house that they'd bought 2 years ago. Why exactly do you need my father's house more than I do? We're growing out of our place, Michael said. With the kids getting older, we need more space. So buy a bigger house. We can't afford a bigger house in this market. But you can afford the mortgage payments on a $450,000 Victorian? Michael looked uncomfortable. We figured we'd pay it off with Mom's help. Of course. Mom would help Michael with mortgage payments on my house while expecting me to figure out my own housing situation independently. This is ridiculous, Mom said, waving the deed papers. I don't care what these say. That house has been in this family for 23 years. You can't just steal it. I didn't steal anything. Dad gave it to me. Your father wasn't competent to make that decision. Are you planning to have his mental capacity legally challenged? I asked. Because that would require proving he was incompetent when he signed these papers. Which would also invalidate every other legal document he signed during that time period, including his medical directives and the updates to his will. Mom's mouth opened and closed without sound. Plus, I continued, the hospital has documentation of his mental status assessments. He was evaluated by 2 different doctors on Tuesday morning and determined to be fully competent to make medical and legal decisions. I'd made sure of that. Dad had insisted on the mental competency evaluation before signing anything, specifically to prevent this exact challenge. Uncle Robert tried to play peacemaker. Anna, maybe we can work something out. Maybe you could sell the house to Michael at a family discount. Why would I do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Because family takes care of family. I looked around the room at these people who'd spent my entire adult life expecting me to be the giver, the helper, the one who sacrificed her own needs for everyone else's benefit. Where was this family takes care family energy when I was working 3 jobs to put myself through graduate school? Silence. Where was it when I was driving 4 hours every weekend for 2 years to help take care of Dad while Michael was too busy with the kids? More silence. Where was it when I spent my entire savings account helping with Dad's medical expenses that insurance didn't cover? Mom found her voice. That's different. How is it different? You were in a position to help. You had a good job savings. And now Michael's in a position to help himself. He has a good job and a working wife. Why can't he save up for a bigger house like everyone else? Because it's expensive and the market is expensive for everyone, including me. I took the deed papers back from Mom and returned them to my purse. The house is mine. Dad wanted me to have it and he made sure I got it legally and clearly. If anyone has a problem with that, you can take it up with the county recorder's office. This is going to tear the family apart, Aunt Patricia said dramatically. The family was already torn apart the moment you all decided I didn't deserve my own inheritance. That's not what we decided, Mom protested. Really? Then what did you decide? She couldn't answer. Michael stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Fine. Keep your precious house. But don't expect any help from us when you need it. I almost laughed. When have I ever gotten help from this family when I needed it? We've always been there for you. Name one time. He couldn't. Name one time anyone in this room offered me financial help, emotional support, or even just basic consideration without me having to ask for it first. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. But you've all been there with your hands out when you needed something from me. Money for Michael's down payment. Money for Mom's car repairs. Money for Dad's medical bills. Time and energy and emotional labor whenever anyone had a crisis. I looked at each of them in turn. Now Dad left me something and your first instinct was to take that away too. Anna, Mom said, her voice breaking, you're being cruel. I'm being realistic. For the first time in my adult life. I turned to leave, then stopped. By the way, Michael, you'll need to return those keys. They don't work anymore. I had the locks changed yesterday. The look of shock on his face was almost worth 20 years of being taken for granted. I walked out of the funeral home and drove directly to my father's house. My house for the first time as the legal owner. It was exactly as Dad had left it. His coffee cup still in the sink from the morning he'd gone to the hospital for the last time. His reading glasses on the kitchen table next to a pile of bills he'd been reviewing. I sat in his favorite chair and cried for the first time since he died. Not just for losing him but for finally understanding how much he'd understood about our family dynamics. How clearly he'd seen the pattern of expecting me to give while giving me nothing in return. The new keys worked perfectly. Over the following weeks, my family tried various approaches to guilt me into changing my mind about the house. Mom called daily with updates about how devastated Michael's children were that they couldn't live in Grandpa's house. She sent me photos of their disappointed faces, as if their temporary sadness was more important than my permanent housing security. Michael's wife Sarah left voicemails explaining how unfair it was that I got to benefit from Dad's hard work when their children would remember this house forever from visits with Grandpa. Uncle Robert cornered me at the grocery store to lecture me about family values and how Dad would be so disappointed in my selfishness. Aunt Patricia started a family group chat where she regularly shared inspirational quotes about forgiveness and putting family first, clearly directed at me. But the most telling response came from my cousin Jenny, who called me 2 weeks after the funeral. I just wanted you to know, she said quietly, that I think you did the right thing. Really? Anna, I've watched this family treat you like an ATM for 20 years. You've paid for more family emergencies than anyone should have to handle. And the thanks you get is everyone expecting you to hand over your inheritance to. She paused. Also, I heard Mom talking to Aunt Patricia about their plan to manage your father's assets before the will was read. They knew exactly what they were doing. That explained the speed and coordination of the key passing ceremony at the funeral. They'd planned it in advance, expecting me to be too grief-stricken and socially pressured to object. 3 months after Dad's death, Michael and Sarah put their house on the market and bought a larger home in a different school district. Apparently they'd had financing options all along. They just preferred the idea of getting my house for free. Mom gradually stopped calling about the mistake I'd made. She also stopped calling about much of anything else, which was actually a relief. The extended family drama faded as people got bored with taking sides in a dispute that had already been legally resolved. And I settled into life in my father's house. My house. It needed work, as old houses always do. I spent weekends learning to maintain the original hardwood floors Dad had refinished by hand. I researched historically appropriate paint colors for the exterior trim he'd been planning to update. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd never been able to do in the apartments I'd rented throughout my 20s and early 30s. Most importantly, I set up a home office in the room Dad had used for his woodworking projects. The space where he'd built furniture and repaired family heirlooms became the space where I started my freelance consulting business. Working from home in a space I actually owned, I was able to take on higher-paying projects and build the kind of professional reputation that would have been impossible while paying rent and commuting to someone else's office. Within 18 months, my income had increased by 40%. Dad had been right about more than just the family dynamics. He'd been right that I was the one who would take care of the house properly. Not just maintaining it but using it as a foundation to build something bigger. 2 years after Dad's death, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in the dining room he'd restored. I invited the family members who had supported my decision to keep my inheritance. Cousin Jenny and her husband, Uncle David from Mom's side, and a few friends who had become chosen family over the years. Mom and Michael were not invited. It felt like the kind of holiday Dad would have wanted. People who actually appreciated each other gathered around his handcrafted dining room table, grateful for genuine connection rather than obligated attendance. During dessert, Jenny raised her glass for a toast. To Anna's dad, who was smart enough to make sure his house went to someone who would love it and use it well. To making hard decisions that protect your future, added Uncle David. To knowing the difference between family and relatives, I said, looking around the table at people who had chosen to support me rather than pressure me to give up what was rightfully mine. The house felt full in a way it never had during the obligatory family gatherings of my childhood, when everyone was present but nobody really wanted to be there. That night, as I cleaned up in the kitchen Dad had renovated, I found myself thinking about the deed transfer we'd signed in the hospital. "Thank you," I said out loud, not sure if I was talking to Dad or to myself. For the first time in my life, I had something that was completely mine. Something nobody could guilt me into sharing, something nobody could take away by appealing to family obligation. The house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was proof that I deserved to receive, not just give. It was evidence that my needs mattered as much as anyone else's. Most importantly, it was a foundation, literally and figuratively, for building a life based on what I wanted rather than what everyone else expected me to provide. Dad had seen what I couldn't see for myself. That sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to let people take advantage of your generosity. The Victorian house stands solid and beautiful, just like he knew it would. Just like he knew I would once I stopped giving pieces of myself away to people who never intended to give anything back. Some inheritances are money or property. Mine was the permission to finally put myself first. It turned out to be worth far more than $450,000.